All right, so this is Crew Adam House here to talk about resisting global fascism in American history. This is combining weeks 12 and 13 of my college course in resisting fascism and global history. Um, I did not do a video last week because right now for weeks 12 and 13, we didn't have. We did have a lot of outside class work, but it's geared more towards a project that is due towards the end of the semester and not so much on just that week's material to be covered in class. So, in other words, the last couple of weeks we've gotten a lecture, like a standalone lecture, and the work that we've been doing outside of class has to do with one single project that's going to be due towards the end of the semester. So we're working on, outside of class, we're working on primary sources right now, on fascist and anti-fascist primary sources outside of class. And as an exercise in historiography, tracking down the more information about those primary sources and cross-referencing them, checking them with other sources, and understanding our primary sources a little better in historical context. So the last two lectures that we've been given don't necessarily have to do with what we've been doing outside of class. And these two lectures, last week's lecture was about the Japanese Empire or the other Axis powers during World War II that were allied with the fascists of Germany and Italy, and and then this week's lecture was about the memory, the importance of memory in resisting fascism, and things like how to preserve that memory and the importance of that memory and things like that. So anyway, one of the things. So let's start. Let's start with last week's lecture and talk about that a little bit. Again, there wasn't a lot of outside from the reading outside the class about that lecture before it happened. But the lecture last week was about the Japanese Empire and looking at the Japanese Empire during World War II as one of the Axis powers, allied with what we classically consider the fascist powers of Europe, of the Third Reich, Germany's Nazis, and Benito Mussolini in Italy, and others that happened along the way, but mostly those three main players as part of World War II on the Axis side. And so one of the main themes and main questions here is, can we consider the Japanese Empire in World War II to be fascist? Yes, it was empirical. The Japanese were definitely on a campaign of building empire. So you had Imperial Japan, but does that necessarily mean that it was fascist? You know, these words do have definitions, and there are differences between words like fascism and communism and even authoritarianism, and so where do these different words and ideas overlap with each other, and what is not appropriate analogies to make. So, from one perspective, it was mentioned by our PhD level historian that is teaching this course that some modern historians do not consider the Japanese Empire in World War II to be an example of fascism. But there are many other modern historians who do consider it to be a fascist empire. Also important to this conversation in the debate between whether you can classify the Japanese Empire in World War II as fascist or not is the fact that at the time, um, the academics and historians and political scientists and sociologists of the day when World War II was happening did very much consider the Japanese Empire to be a fascist regime. Also, it is of note that the Germans and the Italians also considered the Japanese to be fellow fascists. So they kind of saw their own similarities. Now, obviously, they did not consider the Japanese people to be on the same level as the quote unquote Aryans in the hierarchy of races as they saw it. But they did consider the Japanese to be of a superior race of sorts, especially within their sphere of influence in the Far East. And they definitely recognized fascist politics, the similarities of Japanese imperial politics as being akin to their brand of fascism in Europe in places like Germany and Italy. So again, yes, there is some contention even among academics, people who study these subjects professionally full time. There is some contention over whether Japan can be classified as fascist or not. For all intents and purposes, yeah, in the grand scheme of things, when you put the scales on balance, it would tend to tip, I think, more towards classifying World War II Imperial Japan as an example of fascism, an example of a fascist regime. So, with that said, now this was not one of the books that we read for class this time, but I do want to mention this book because I did read this book a long time ago. And honestly, it's been several years, so I would really need to reread this book to give, good, competent, well-informed commentary on it. And I just don't have time to add it to all the reading that I have to do right now for this and my other classes. So I'm just going to mention the fact that yes, I read this a long time ago, and so I'm not going to give you a summary or report on it right now, but this book, The Rape of Nanking, is very much worth your time. This book is copyright 1997 by Iris Chang, and it's about, let's see, 250, no, it's even shorter than that. It's about 230 pages. And the print inside is fairly large and spaced out. So, this is definitely a book that you could read in one day, or in just a few short sessions if you really wanted to. You could easily read this within a week with just several short reading sessions, maybe a chapter, 2 chapters a night before you go to bed or something. You could get through this book pretty easily. Now, when I say get through it easily, I'm saying, yeah, you can read it kind of fast, but I'm also going to warn you of the explicit material. Again, it's been a while since I've been through this book, but I do remember that it is very heavy subject material. The Rape of Nanking, this is one of the most brutal episodes in World War II. The fighting between the Japanese and the Chinese. And now this took place in 1937, largely in 1937. So, was it part of World War II? I mean, it depends on where you consider the beginning of World War II. Here in America, a lot of times we don't consider World War II. We don't consider it to be World War II until we got involved, right? In in late 1941 after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. But there had already been a lot of fighting going on before America ever got involved. So if you want to say this was part of the events leading up to World War II, whatever, this was part of conflict between countries leading up to and during World War II, and the Japanese invasion of the Chinese mainland, and all the fighting that took place there is definitely worth your time exploring as well, especially if you're interested in war history or World War II history in particular. You don't want to pass up an opportunity to learn about what is now known in the common vernacular as the Rape of Nanking. All right, so with that said, that's kind of all I really want to say about that. I don't want to make this video too long, but also want to mention the second lecture then. So this, again, combining weeks 12 and 13 here in one video. Week 13 lecture was, we actually had a guest lecturer, PhD level guest lecturer come in who is an expert. Her field of expertise academically is in the Holocaust, in Holocaust memoriam. And so we got a good lecture on thinking about the Holocaust in history and its place in history, and not just the Holocaust, but expanding it a little wider topic into its place in what was happening in the world at the time in World War II, and within the context of the rise and life of fascism as we know it. And what I really want to say, again, I'm not trying to reteach what's been taught. I'm not trying to basically just re-give some PhD's lecture, but more about just my own reflections on what I've been taught and on what I've read and what I've learned. And, and some of the highlights from our class lecture and readings and discussions. And some of the things that stand out are, the idea of how, there's always been, and I think most people are familiar with the idea from the time that we're all little kids in elementary school, the first time we have a social studies class, or the first time we have a history class, or, even all the way back in elementary school, American kids get this. The first time we have a civics or social studies or history class, typically, the teacher is going to ask the class, why should we study history? Why is it important to study history? Why does it matter? Why do we care? Why should we be interested in it? And I think typically we come back to the cliche, that the traditional answer there is that, and I think the quote again comes from General Santa Anna, actually, something about, paraphrasing, but something to the effect that those who do not learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Now, I would add to that I'm almost 50 years old, and by the observation of this world over my lifetime, I've kind of come to the conclusion that even if we do know our history, it seems like we're kind of doomed to repeat it. So, for whatever it's worth, we continue to repeat or to rhyme. If you want to take a page out of Mark Twain's notes, maybe history rhymes more than it repeats. But the idea just being that we seem like the humanity continues to make a lot of the same old mistakes over and over again. So what really value does it have if we know our history, but we still don't really tend to learn from it? And maybe that's a question that you have an answer to, or at least food for thought, so that you have something to chew on a little bit when it comes to these questions and ideas. Um, okay, so why is it important to remember the Holocaust, and why is it important to remember resistance to fascism throughout world history? Why do we care about this subject? Why should we care about this subject? And even if there is this tendency for many people not to learn the lessons of history, I think it's still at least some of us that are endeavoring to learn our history and to see what we can learn from our history and to apply those lessons and to at least make the effort to at least try to learn from the lessons of the past and prevent, to whatever extent we can, the damage of our decisions and our actions as we move forward. And, obviously, we don't want to repeat these great travesties, these great atrocities like the Holocaust. We would prefer not to repeat the mistakes of rampant violent imperialism, such as was visited on the world by Japan and Germany during World War II. And um, or even what the black shirts did in Italy, even though they never really achieved some great military prowess throughout the world or even within Europe. They were fairly benign in their ability. But, again, we talk about without Mussolini, do we ever really get the Hitler that we know from history? Hitler learned a lot from Mussolini. So there again, there's these reasons for us to learn from history and to try to prevent some of the mistakes of the past, or at least mitigate some of the damage that is done by those who are repeating some of the mistakes from the past, and try to minimize the damage that's being done by those alive today who are repeating the mistakes of the past around us. Um, resisting fascism in global history. Um, we can learn from the mistakes of the past, but I also in this video, want to focus on another thing, and that is the subject of what I presented in my 20th century European class the other day. I had to do a project. It was for my 20th century European history class. Each student was assigned to identify a theme or subject or event from 20th century European history, and then develop you could either write a traditional paper, or you could put together some kind of project or presentation, and then just write a reflection about what you learned from putting that project together. So I decided to do a project instead of a traditional paper. I've written a lot of papers as a college student. This seemed like a nice opportunity to do something a little unconventional and a little different than just writing another paper. And so I took the opportunity to put together a presentation on other ways that we have resisted and fought against fascism in 20th century Europe, besides direct combat and besides participating in the hostilities of World War II. Because I think what happens a lot is when we talk about resisting fascism in history, for a lot of us, I think our mind, the first thing that it runs to is, oh, people fought the Nazis in World War II. And that's kind of the easiest, simplest answer because it's like the biggest example that we have. It's the most readily available. It's the thing that most people know the most about, and so it's kind of like when you go to Thailand for the first time and everybody thinks, I've got to have pad thai. I've got to try pad thai. Even if you've had it in another country, like, oh, they're famous for pad thai. It's the national dish. And so when I go to Thailand, I've got to have a plate of authentic pad thai. And yes, pad thai is good. I enjoy it. I love it. It's good food. But when I'm in Thailand, I don't eat pad thai a whole lot. I eat it every now and then, but it's by no means my favorite Thai dish. And there are a lot of other Thai dishes that I enjoy quite a bit more than I like pad Thai. So, when I'm there, I want to eat patsy yukai. I want to eat tom yum pla. I want to eat lap nua. I want to eat khao soi. I want to eat gang jut kai nam. I want to eat things like this. So, and a lot of other things too. I won't get too far off into that now. If you ever get a chance to go to Thailand, it's totally worth it. And they do have the world's best food. Thai people know how to make anything taste good. It is the world's best place for flavor. They are the kings of flavor for sure. But I just make that analogy to point out that when you get into a subject, you find that there's a lot more than just that one biggest thing that everybody tends to focus on, and that there's much more richness there. There's much more beyond that initial experience or understanding of something. And so, when you dig deeper into resistance against fascism in world history, you find that picking up a gun as an Allied soldier and fighting Nazis in World War II is only the surface level of it. That's only scratching the surface. That's just the beginning of it. And, while we can lionize the service of those who did take up arms against the Nazis and their Axis friends in World War II, there's so much more to be examined within World War II, like those who were on the home front that were making the bullets and the tanks and the bombers, and those who were raising the victory gardens, and those who were writing the letters and putting together the care packages, and those who were trying to find ways that financing the operations of the Allies, and there were so many other ways that people resisted during World War II, and that those efforts are worth remembering as well. And then you go before World War II even started, all the way back to the 1920s, when Mussolini and the Black Shirts were first rising to power. There were resistors who were standing against them, and people who were opposing them in the streets, who were protesting against them, who were even coming to be fighting in the streets, street fights. And then after World War II, we've talked about a little bit in this video series, we've talked about those people that right after World War II, you already have the swastika being raised again, and people marching and promoting fascist ideals again on the streets of Britain and other European countries, that fascist movements were already trying to make their mark again immediately in the aftermath of World War II, and up through the rest of the 20th century, and even till today. We still have fascism with us. And so I want to drive home the point, again, that fascism does not always manifest in the same way. and that in fact, every time fascism is found, it tends to have its own flavor to the place and time in which it is found. And so, not all fascism is going to display the swastika. Not all fascism is going to have black shirts or brown shirts. Again, we had a fascist movement here in the United States under William Dudley Pelley that chose their uniform as silver shirts, right? So, and sometimes maybe they don't even choose such a uniform. Part of the modern Klan movement in the United States is specifically trying to avoid the images of the past with that movement, and moving into what Klansman David Duke has called, what did he call it? The Clean Klan, moving from the cow pastures into the hotel meeting rooms, into these venues that look more respectable, and hotel ballrooms, and putting away the Klan robes in favor of a suit and tie, and trying to look more respectable, trying to project the image of being more serious and more thoughtful, and so every time, again, the idea here is just that when fascism rises, it doesn't always look the same. It doesn't always sound exactly the same. It's always kind of got its own flavor to it in each time period that it comes about, and it may have a different focus. We've talked about that as well. Pre-World War II fascism tended to focus mainly on anti-Semitism, although it had all these other prejudices and bigotries and biases, racial hierarchy and things. They also hated black people. They also hated brown people. They also hated Asian people. They hated anybody who was not a white Christian, right? But they tended to focus mainly on anti-Semitism. And then after World War II, we get this shift to where at least Western fascism still tends to focus more on immigration issues now. So it's more of a xenophobic movement, an anti-immigrant movement, than it is anything else. And yes, the anti-Semitism can still be there, and often is, and often is still a major part of fascism. But it doesn't tend to be the main priority and the main driver of the rhetoric anymore. Again, to continue to drive this point home, fascism evolves. Fascism evolves. And so I think one of the important elements of studying fascism throughout world history, and resistance to that fascism throughout world history in the different countries and time periods in which it arises, the different movements, iterations in which it arises, also helps us to understand how and why fascism evolves, and kind of help us to understand when a new iteration of fascism evolves, how we might better understand how and why it's coming about, why it's gaining traction again, why it's manifesting, why it's growing again, and put us in a better position, not only to understand it, but to be able to resist it. So, let's see, what else do I want to talk about here? I think that's getting pretty close to the end of this, but I do want to put in a word for creativity here. And this was one of the main points that I kind of ended my presentation about resisting fascism in 20th century Europe in my history class there, was about the idea that there are other ways to resist fascism. We can be creative about it. So it doesn't always mean picking up a gun, taking up arms against fascists and their forces. Sometimes resistance to fascism looks like art. Sometimes resistance to fascism even looks like entertainment. Sometimes, let's take some examples. Charlie Chaplin, the great dictator. This is art and entertainment. It's even using comedy against fascism. Um, if you want to look at a more modern example of like anti-fascist movies, even fictional accounts of fascism, resisting fascism, you get things like George Orwell's 1984, and you get the movie V for Vendetta. Um, you can use, and there was one of the things that I mentioned in my presentation was I had found a theater group in Britain in 1977. It was basically a theater group of people who had basically been a part of other failed theater groups. And so they had come together as kind of the scraps of several other failed theater groups into a new theater group that decided, for all intents and purposes, they decided, well, everything else has failed, so why don't we just go ahead and have a theater group doing something that we feel is important to do, that we're actually passionate about. And so their theater group went around in Britain in 1977 putting on productions, anti-fascist plays, anti-fascist productions. And so this theater group was successful, at least for a time, putting on anti-fascist theater productions. And these plays were, they were always anti-fascist themes. And so basically the idea is just that, there are other ways to resist fascism, and sometimes we can tap into our own creativity, and we can tap into each one of us, each individual person can tap into our own talents and our own skill sets for what ways we can be effective in resisting fascism. And your talents and skill sets may be different from mine, and mine different from the next person's. And that's not only okay, but that's good, because that gives us a great diversity of resistance. So, we can resist through art, we can resist through entertainment, we can resist through journalism, we can definitely resist through things like economic boycotts and using the law, the courts, using the law to help us along the way, to appeal to the law, to help us with the rule of law, wherever fascism is trying to thwart the rule of law, with its with its tendency to put brutality over civility and these kinds of things. And so, journalism comes into play, academic work comes into play. I would like to think the fact that I have decided to make my video diary from this college course in resisting fascism and global history as a form of using academic work to help resist fascism. So these are the types of things that we can do to resist fascism, other than the obvious, most easy answer of picking up a gun and going and fighting the Nazis on the battlefield. All right, that was just one time and one place. Fascism has been with us now for over 100 years, and it has risen in countries all around the world, and different places, different peoples, in different iterations, and where it's worn different masks and chosen different emphasis and different types of rhetoric throughout time. And so This is just basically my plug for continuing your education in fascism and in resistance to fascism, so as to have the tools in your belt to be better equipped, so that if and when you see the dangers of fascism, you know how in some way to be more effective, that you can optimize your ability to be a resistor of fascism. All right, so I think that's going to conclude it for weeks 12 and 13 here in this video. There's going to be at least one more week and maybe two more. We do have one more class with lecture that we're going to be doing next week. And then, and I want to cover that one in a video. And then there's also a final project that goes along with this class. And I may decide to do another video on my final project, or maybe even some of the other students' final projects. We'll see what happens, how that plays out. So I've got at least one or two more videos coming on resisting fascism and global history, this college level course that I've been taking in the fall semester of 2025. And with that, fuck Trump and fuck ICE.